Welcome to the Listen Up podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the Listen Up podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by Listen Up Hearing Centers. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they connect better with friends and family and remain independent. The reason I'm so passionate about hearing loss is I lost my brother Robbie twice. First to the hearing loss from radiation to his brain tumor, and then again when he passed away. I only care for ears. I'm the E of ENT. I performed over 10,000 ear surgeries and taken care of tens of thousands more with hearing loss over the past 20 years. I'm the founder of Listen Up Hearing Center. I'm also the author of a book of the same name, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about that, go to listenuphearing.com. That's listenuphearing.com. I'm excited about our guest today. It's Dr. Emily McMahan. She's the owner of Alaska Hearing Tinnitus Center and is currently the president of the Audiology Practice Standard Organization. She holds board certification in audiology through the American Academy of Audiology, is a fellow of the American Academy of Audiology and the Academy of Doctors of Audiology. She is passionate about helping her patients to hear the life that they love by enhancing the quality of their lives through their ears. She specializes in diagnostic hearing and hearing management and tinnitus management. Staying current in hearing healthcare is a passion for her, and she's always strived to provide her patients excellent care surrounding their individual needs, which is great because that's why we're going to talk today about the standards. But before that, Emily, tell me a little bit about your pathway to audiology, and interestingly, where were you born and how did you end up in Alaska?
Yeah. So I grew up in Ohio in the greater Cincinnati area, and audiology kind of started from a young age for me. Growing up, one of my childhood best friends, her little brother was actually deaf. And at the time, this is pre-cochlear implants for children. Actually, it was really adult implants at that, in fairness too. And so if I was playing over at their house and he had an audiology appointment, we got loaded up into their car and off that I went with her as well. And so I got to watch Kyle have hearing aid appointments and audiology appointments, just kind of piqued an interest. A good family friend is an ENT, and I kind of shouted him around throughout. When I went into high school, I fell in love with American Sign Language, kind of just mixing all things together. Went into college, knew I wanted to go into healthcare, wasn't quite sure. My, at the time, high school sweetheart is now my long-term, at this point, husband. Knew I wanted a family and wanted to have a work-life balance, but in healthcare, that's not always a very easy and attainable thing. And decided to go into ears and audiology. So I kind of put my love of having watched both the ENT side of Kyle's care as well as the audiology side of Kyle's care from a young childhood, and then just kind of went with it and found it from an early age. I was born and raised in Ohio. I did my undergraduate at Ohio at University of Cincinnati, go Bearcats. I did my doctorate degree at Salus University, which is in Philadelphia. And then I did my residency in Anchorage, Alaska. Couldn't have gotten farther away from Philadelphia. No offense. West Coast, best coast. And we went all the way to this side of the country. Thought we'd be up here for just a couple of years, and 11 years later, here we are. A couple practices, couple kids, and several dogs more later. We are very much Alaskan at this point, and this is our home, and we love it up here. Didn't expect that this would be our long-term home. We thought it was just, like we have no belongings and nothing of value in this world, and here we are.
You're on a stint to Alaska rather
we
than
thought
LA.
We were. We thought it was like, let's have an adventure before we settle down and have, like adult belongings as adult students. And we came off the airplane and it was like, oh, wow, we love it here. And the community in Alaska, we just love, and we love being in Alaska and serving our community. And so it's been fun, unexpected. This was not the plan to stay here. And like I said, 11 years in May later, this is home now, and home for long. This is the long-term goal, is to continue staying and practicing here.
That's great. So, well, sometimes the no plan is the best plan. So
exactly.
And so, before we get into the standards, what are some of the challenges, unique to Alaska? I mean, I'm familiar. I mean, geography obviously is probably the biggest one. So I assume you do remote care or see people from far away.
Yeah, remote care, I think, is definitely one of our leading difficulties, especially that was highlighted in the past several years with COVID and pandemic protocols. We live in a state, we are not connected to the rest of you. We also live in a state that there is not much big healthcare. We have 3 real hospitals. That's our entire massive healthcare system. And by massive, you would laugh at the size of our hospital beds.
Right.
And so, with that, we had a lot of exceptional isolation the past few years, which hearing loss and isolation in a normal year already have a problem. So hearing
Sure.
loss, isolation, plus COVID, that posed an extra problem. A lot of the small rural villages didn't allow travel to and from Anchorage. Anchorage is where the majority of our healthcare happens. And so we had to be a little bit more creative than normal, a little bit extra thinking outside of the box. Telehealth up here has been a way of life long before the pandemic. But it is something that we do regularly. It is not unusual that I'm talking to somebody who's 1,000 miles away because they're not coming into town that day. We always say this is not the state to practice in if you like schedules and routine care, because I could think that my schedule is X, 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 and X for the day, and then we get a snowstorm and it all blows over. Or the fish are on and everyone's fishing and they just cancel their whole schedule because they're like, oh, river's hot, not coming into my appointment today. It's definitely a little bit different. It's also not the place to practice if you aren't flexible with follow-up care, just because realistically, maybe they can only afford 1 flight per year to come into the city.
Sure.
They don't have small care clinics in their home cities and towns. And so you have to be willing to go that extra mile, do the routine care, do telehealth care, think outside the box, spend time over video call, walking them through troubleshooting, explaining things. You meet a lot of relatives who drop off parts and pieces. You do a lot of remote care and mailing hearing aids and back and forth and troubleshooting how to get things back online over calls. I've had patients who were whaling captains who call and they're like, oh, missing my appointment, doc. I got a whale today, but oh man, my hearing aid's dead. Can you help me? And you're like, yeah, let's walk through this. So you never know what's happening. That's also, in my opinion, half the fun of it is you don't know what you're going to experience, but it can be hard from a clinical perspective because you also want to make sure that you're taking care of these patients in the best manner possible. So if they're in front of me, we want to do anything and everything that we can because I might not see them again for a year. If they're long distance, I still want to take care of them as best as I can and just know that, hey, the next time we're physically together, these are some of our goals for physical appointment versus these are some of our goals for our telehealth and care appointments. And just kind of always having that fluid conversation of this is something that we can do remotely, but the next time that I do see you in town or you're coming in town, this would be a reason that I'd like to have you stop into the office because I'd like to be able to do these activities of which physically would give us, the best options to keep those updated for you. So you just have to kind of be on your toes because you never know what quite's going to happen.
Yeah, it sounds great. And really interesting. And, you're going above and beyond to take care of these people over. Even I think 1,000 miles is maybe some of them are even substantially further, if I'm not mistaken.
We're a real big state.
Yeah.
I think it's, everyone always says like your patients come. I think it's like with a 5-mile radius is a general answer for big cities.
No, that's
and I'm like
12-minute drive, right? None of yours are.
I can't be anywhere in 12 minutes, but they take, they literally come via boat, plane, ferry, train, every form of transportation they come to me by.
That's great. That's great. And so one of the reasons we connected is you're currently the president of the Audiology Practice Standard Organization, correct?
So
how did you get up? You're in Alaska. It's probably not the most convenient place to participate in this from, especially if you have in-person meetings, which I don't know if you do or you don't. But tell me how you got involved in the organization.
Yeah, I started as just a general member at large. The group was founded in 2017. I became a member in 2018. And I just started being just a member. And I quickly became just a board member at large. I worked my way up from treasurer to then vice president to president. And I actually just completed my term as president. I'm current past president. We just switched roles. And it has been a really fun position. Now, I will say we were doing in-person meetings, but with COVID, all of that changed. And so we hold monthly meetings virtually. And we were doing annual meetings in person and sometimes biannual meetings in person, but we've just done monthly board meetings because our board is made up of providers across the country. And even in 2017, when the group was founded, we were scattered across the country. And so we have an upcoming meeting actually in April. So we will all be physically together at a national meeting. And many of us just saw each other in October at a different national meeting.
Sure.
And so we do have physical contact, which we get a lot of actions completed. But thankfully, we have a longstanding monthly meeting. We all meet for an hour via Zoom, and everyone from all different fields of our team kind of join in together and get a lot of things accomplished.
So tell me a little bit about the organization. What's the goal and what are you guys working on?
Yeah, so as you're familiar, you have standards of practice, and that's not something that's unfamiliar in healthcare. Unfortunately, within audiology, we have guidelines and we talk about best practices, but we never really established that standards level. And so we're always striving to be best, right? We want to practice well, and you want to practice above standards. No one should practice at a standards level. That's not a good goal of how to be a provider. But this group that, and I was not one of the founders, but this group, when they founded it, realized that we had this big lapse, that we were always striving to be better. But how do you establish what is better if you haven't established what is the foundation, so to say? And those founding group members, all of which at this point are no longer on the board, but thankfully still very big supportive members, they went to the three largest bodies in audiology, which are the American Doctors of Audiology, the American Academy of Audiology, and American Speech and Language Hearing. And they went to them and said, like, hey, we don't have these standards. We need them. And all three were kind of like, we'll put it on the docket, so to say. And big groups and dockets usually mean never happening.
Right.
And so, yes, this is a very, very summarized version of those conversations. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And that group said, enough is enough. We're going to do it. We need standards of care. We are a doctor level profession. We are pushing for more and more access. We need to have standards of care. And so that group started, and they got everything together. In the last couple of years, and I have been privy to all of this side of it from being on the board, is we have 3 published standards. Those have all been peer reviewed, peer vetted. They've all made it through legal review. They've all had public evaluation time, of which we've sent them out to our peers and asked for evaluation. And then we have several others also in the subject matter expert process and review panel right now that are in the works. And we just got started on gathering subject matter expert groups for 2 upcoming standards that are in the pipeline. So we have the topics picked. We've started gathering who will be in charge of those. And so while, yes, at the moment we have 3 completed, and we've had several people say, well, it's been since 2017. That's not a lot. Well, it is and it isn't. It took a lot in the beginning. All of this was funded out of our own pockets. Lawyers, and going over all of the legalese and making sure that this can stand up in all 50 states and territories when our state licensure laws are vastly different. It's quite the process. It's also a process to get multiple providers to agree in one room what the standard of care is going to be. And now that we've got the process down, it's been much smoother, which is how we've been able to produce several of these standards. And it's now that it's happening, we're starting to put 2 and 3 together at a time, because we can get multiple SME groups together and kind of working on their roles. So, the exciting news is we just had our big planning meeting in November for kind of our 2023 goals. So one of my final meetings as president and our incoming president's meeting, kind of looking at our future. And we have a full list of very real life, tangible goals that should be happening in hopefully 2023, 2024, which if you had asked them back in 17 and 18, I don't think would have even come close to making the list.
Sure.
So we're a small group, but we're a mighty group. The standards that we have completed are an intake standard, a hearing aid for adult and geriatric patients, and for pediatric patients. So the 3 that we tackled, the first and foremost, we were going
biggies.
for
Some of the biggies, right?
How do we hit the most of our population at the most time? Because we wanted to know that if you received care, and I'm going to say Florida to Alaska, 2 of our farthest points, we should all be having a very similar, at bottom most level. We should all have the same questions, be seeing the same things. We should agree that a hearing test should contain the exact same portions. At a standard level, my hearing test shouldn't be much different than my colleague's hearing test in any other state of which we receive care. But unfortunately, and you see this, I'm sure you get reports from many clinics and different levels, they vary vastly.
I get audiograms without the identifying provider's name on them. I mean, you don't even know who did it.
And that's a problem.
It is. I'd agree.
It's a problem. And so while, yes, we're laughing, not laughing, but it's a problem. And so we need to have that standard of care, and we should be holding everyone to it, because that's what we owe our patients. Our patients should walk in and know that when they pick someplace to go and receive their health care, that they shouldn't have to worry about, am I getting this level of care? No, they should be able to walk in and feel confident that everyone's here and that hopefully they've received an office that's able to practice at this level. But, we all like to be the best, but how do we define the best if we can't define what we've started at? And so while we have some groups that say, well, we've already established the best, and we don't disagree with that, and we don't want people practicing to our standards. That's certainly not a goal. I hope no one practices these standards. I hope at minimum, these are just where you start from, and then hopefully you far significantly surpass these standards. We had to start somewhere, because if we don't have some standard of care, how do we end up, heaven forbid, in a courtroom? How do we end up someplace and say that we did the correct job, or we did not skip something, or that we provided the best level of care that we did, if we can't even agree at minimum what an audiology exam should look like?
But some of these standards are supported by literature and research, correct?
Yes.
And so they also show where you have weakness in data, right? So that's the other area for the listeners. It'll sometimes say, oh, we think this should be in the standard, but we don't have enough evidence. And then fortunately, our academic colleagues might say, oh, I can look into answering that question to provide that data, right?
Yes. One of the cool things about the standards is they're accessible to everyone. Whether you are a member of our organization or not, this is not meant to be exclusive. This is meant to be accessible to everyone. And we do have a working relationship with the three big groups in audiology, of which they know we're here. They're happy that we're here. They're excited that we're here, because this is meant to be one for all. This is not meant to be ours versus yours versus theirs. And so anyone can access them. They're on our website. It's audiologystandards.org. And you can see them. You can see where they're linked to. You can see who wrote them. The nice thing about audiology is we're a pretty small field. Most of our authors of our academia are of all of our academic books. That's who is writing our standard guidelines. They're in here. We've made sure that our board and our subject matter experts are comprised of different fields. They're made up of academics, they're made up of PhD, they're made up of clinical, they're made of people that are practicing in private practices, from ENT into educational. We've got industry, we've got manufacturer. We have a really diverse body, because these standards are not meant to be private practice swinging. They're not meant to be academic swinging. They're meant to be a basic standard of care that is all encompassing of audiology. And that is something that is very crucial to a small group like this, that we are doing our absolute best to make sure that we are as unbiasedly as possible meeting the needs of the full profession. So we've made sure that our board is comprised of different members. We've made sure that the subject matter experts are a wide variety. There is variety, but also for people within audiology, you're going to see those names whose books you learned out of. You're going to see the names whose peer review journals are published in the hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, for some of our more prolific authors, because it matters that we have credible and well-published and well-renowned sources. These are not just someone whose friend we picked because we were friends in school, so we put you on the board.
Right.
And anyone can volunteer if you feel, then you're listening to this and you're like, I'm really passionate about cochlear implants, and you feel like you have a lot of good, come to us, say you'd like to join. Please participate. These are created for us and by us so that we can all practice and have great standards. And so, that's the nice thing about it, is if you feel strongly and passionately and can sit at the table and bring good literature and information, well, then please come and bring it so that we can create the best standards possible.
So let me understand a couple of things. One is you don't have to be a board member to be on a committee, right? Is that correct? Right. So because the subject matter experts are invited, I assume, for particular topics. And then the second thing I would surmise is you're working on cochlear implantations as one of the future standards, given that
upcoming. Yes. Yeah.
So
a couple of the ones in the short term are cerumen management, infection control, cochlear implants, vestibular, and tinnitus. Those 5 are all in the kind of short-term pipeline.
Well, at some point, you're going to have to revisit the standards too. That's the other thing. So for the listeners and viewers, they do get updated. So as I said, there are gaps in knowledge. People go back to look to see if the literature has updated to be able to support more rigorous or higher standards or different standards, those types of, it just depends on what the evidence suggests, right?
Correct. And we do have that in our bylaws. I believe we have it's every 5 years written that they will be revisited.
Well, then you're
And
going to
so
be
in
busy because you're going to be pretty soon have to go back to your first ones, right?
So our intake standard will be the first that will have to be revisited. But, even the intake standard, for example, is making sure we have appropriate inclusive language, making sure that we have language that's comfortable for everybody when they come into the office, which a lot of offices are not always as current on, and just making sure that from step one of somebody coming into your office is, do they feel safe to receive healthcare in your clinic? And that's something that's important. So these are all things that have to be revisited and should be revisited. You want to make sure that your first piece on paper is a welcoming stance and not a stance that would turn away care. And so just as something as simple as intake standards are important, and that will be our first, that was our first published. We figured that was our first, that if we messed up on, wouldn't hurt a person because it's a paper document and they're easier to edit than hurting a physical standard, which does change how people practice in healthcare. But yes, they will be revisited, and that is crucial, because without revising them, then they're another fairly useless piece of paper.
Sure. And so where are the standards on the website, or where are they?
They are. So actually, if you are at audiologystandards.org, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, we have our Meet the APSO board. Then we have current standards. If you click on read more, it'll list the published ones as well as their links. And then it will even talk about what standards are currently in progress. Mm-hmm. And then we have a section that you can hit read more. And you can even submit feedback that you could say, hey, I'd really like you to start working on a standard, or throw out an idea that you would like. And we can throw that into the mix. This past year in St. Louis, so last April at our American Academy of Audiology meeting, many of us attended. We had a table present and we had a survey, and we asked people, what standards would you like to see next? And all of those standards are what made that short list, because we wanted to see, what areas do you feel we need to be hitting next? And so, it's something that we heard you, we listened, we're working on those next. And that's the advantage of being a small group, is we are still small enough that we can hear you and listen and do something and not have to move it down the list.
What's the biggest surprise that you learned from getting involved in this?
It's a lot more work than you realize. It's not just putting smart brains together and putting words on a paper. It takes a lot to come up with a way, because there's a lot of troubleshooting that goes into this. We walk through different scenarios. There are differences of opinions, people coming together.
Language
and saying,
too, right? Different language people want to use.
Extremely important. Even a matter of just changing certain words to make sure that everyone can agree on a context or a pretext or how it works, back and forth with legal. And just, it doesn't seem so difficult until you do it and you realize how intricate the process really is. And that's where it took us a little bit of time to get started. And now that I feel we've got a really good flow of the process, it's been much smoother at this point. But it is a lot more detailed than I had any idea before getting involved in the process. And it's hard to get a bunch of providers across multiple time zones to agree on one time zone, to everybody come and meet. You've got providers, on the East Coast who generally usually end up getting stuck at the end of the day. So then you've got providers up on the West Coast. We've got 6 time zones of difference in this country. Sure. I mean, you've got some providers that are eating lunch and some providers that are eating dinner, or they've already gone home for the day. And you've got to find all those people to meet routinely, repetitively, and to always come together to be, it can be hard. Clinic schedules fluctuate, people fluctuate. It's hard. So kind of wrangling the group can also be challenging, just Sure. with flexible clinic schedules. But it's been really rewarding to see what we've been able to come up with and know that this will have a really positive impact on the profession. And the ultimate goal, when you're looking at this, is people ask why. Well, the why is really our patients, because this is ultimately another protection, another safeguard, another way that we can leave an impact on our field, where we went from being a small field and a younger field in the world of healthcare. We're a pretty young guy in the healthcare field. Yes. And we grew really quickly. And we went quickly, and we split off from speech pathology. We're no longer dual. We're no longer master. We quickly went doctorate. And a lot of things changed very quickly. And sometimes when things change quickly, we get ahead of ourselves. And this was something that I wasn't around at that time, and I'm not speaking on behalf, but this is something that got missed, or was it? I don't know how. Like I said, this wasn't my time. But like I said, thankfully we had a really strong group of providers who saw it and recognized it and said, we need to change this. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to be a part of it, because I do think that moving forward, as healthcare changes, Medicare, CMS keeps changing, guidelines keep changing. We never know what's going to keep changing. But at the end of the day, our ultimate goal always needs to be to safeguard our patients and to protect our patients. And part of protecting our patients is standardization. And so that we know that if I'm sending a patient down to you in your clinic, or you're sending a patient up to me, maybe they moved up to me, that I can trust that we have all of those good safeguard measures, because that's a trusting relationship. And it's an important one, because we should be able to know that if I send a referral down to a colleague in Arizona or to a colleague in California or wherever they might go, I want them to know that, hey, I have done everything and with my best power to provide you the most information available that was clinically appropriate. And this is just a way that we can get in a really good kind of routine to say, we have all of these things checked off, but hey, look, I'm practicing up here, but don't worry, I've met all of the minimum guide, all of the standards, and you don't have to worry about gaps in this patient's care when they came from my office, because we took care of all of those. There's nothing harder as a healthcare provider than going, oh gosh, all this was skipped, or like we needed this, or who saw you? What day were you there? There's no date on here. Or what the heck happened during that appointment? As simple as write notes, put case history. Sometimes you get whole blank chunks of audiograms, and words matter. It's important. And hopefully these help just make things a little bit cleaner and a little more smooth for our patients when they're going. So many of them are seniors and struggle with cognition. And so many of them already struggle with keeping up with that historian and that good case history. We can really help them with that. And we can do that being their audiologist and being helpful. And hopefully these documents will help people just remind that, hey, we can do this. We've got really good standards, and here's ways that we can always make sure we're practicing to the best of our ability.
Yeah, it gives a peer measurement too, a way to kind of say to peers, this is kind of what we would at least want from you within our profession, which I think is wonderful. Yeah. Because in the end, you're right. It's about patients. So
absolutely.
So that's wonderful. So Emily, what's your favorite sound?
Mine would have to be my 1 and 3-year-old laughing, which usually means they're up to mischief, but there's nothing better than their big belly laughs.
Which is a good thing to some extent, especially if they're up to good, no good, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Exactly.
So for the listeners, this is Dr. Emily McMahan. She's the owner of the Alaska Hearing Tinnitus Center. Emily, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
My website is allearsalaska.com, and you can send us a contact form through there. And that's probably the easiest way. And it will just send it into my email, and then we can shoot you an email back.
All right. So everybody, that's allearsalaska.com, right? And I know you're on LinkedIn too, if people want to look for you there. Yes. So, well, this has been great. I mean, I'm really appreciative of the work that you're putting in. For the listeners, I don't think it's very well paid work, just to let you know. So people do this
all
for
volunteer.
The love. Yeah, I know. They do it for the love. They do not do it for remuneration. It's to help the profession. And you're right, our patients move forward. And I very much thank you for that work. Again, this is Dr. Emily McMahan. She's the owner of the Alaska Hearing Tinnitus Center, and she's the immediate past president of the Audiology Practice Standards Organization. And thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
This has been great. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listen Up podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.